They said the child was already gone. What the maid noticed instead could end her life as she knew it. The Quinceval home did not feel like a place of mourning. It felt like a place where decisions had already been made. Everything moved quietly, efficiently, as if grief had been scheduled and completed. Rowan Quinceval had been declared dead earlier that morning. Not with questions, not with hesitation, just forms, signatures, silence. Harlan Quinceval stood near the window while others spoke for him. Doctors, lawyers, people trained to make endings sound clean. Althea Monroe stayed close to the body because no one else would. She told herself it was habit, routine, years of work that taught her to stay when others left. But when she adjusted the sheet, something didn't settle the way it should have. She froze, not because she was sure, but because she wasn't. The room felt suddenly dangerous, not from noise, but from certainty. Outside, arrangements were already being finalized. A time, a place, a coffin that would soon be closed forever. Althea understood then what no one had said out loud. This wasn't about proving anything. This was about deciding whether to speak or disappear quietly with everyone else. And whatever she chose next, there would be no way to take it back. Before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's dive back into the story. The viewing room at Laurel Ridge Estate carried the sterile quiet of finality. Dr. Pembroke signed the last line on Rowan Quinceval's death certificate with practiced efficiency, his pen moving across paper as though documenting inventory rather than a child's life. The cause of death section read, acute respiratory failure secondary to congenital defect, vague enough to satisfy protocol, specific enough to discourage questions. Harlan Quinceval stood at the mahogany desk, his jaw tight as granite. The lawyer slid documents across the polished surface: estate amendments, trust allocations, funeral arrangements pre-approved by the family attorney. Harlan's signature appeared on each page with mechanical precision. He never read past the first paragraph. His eyes remained fixed on the middle distance, somewhere between the paperwork and the small form lying beneath white silk in the corner. "My condolences, Mr. Quinceval," Dr. Pembroke murmured, closing his medical bag with a decisive click. "The arrangements have been expedited per your request. Everything is in order." Harlan nodded once. The doctor left without another word. A death certificate exists, but no one describes the moment he actually died. Althea Monroe entered to collect the signed documents, her uniform crisp despite the weight pressing against her chest. The room felt wrong, not cold that would make sense. Instead, warmth lingered near Rowan's body, subtle but unmistakable. She moved closer, her fingers brushing the edge of the silk cloth. The fabric held heat, as though life had only recently departed rather than hours ago. She glanced toward the doorway. 2 estate staff had been assigned rotation duty to maintain the viewing room. Both had found excuses to step away. One claimed a sudden migraine, the other simply disappeared after his first shift, mumbling something about not feeling right. Sometimes closure is offered before truth is finished speaking. Althea's hands trembled as she straightened the documents. Protocol dictated she leave, return to her quarters, resume normal duties. Her mind screamed the logic of it: a tragic loss, a family in mourning, systems functioning as designed. But her feet wouldn't move. Her body anchored itself beside the casket, some primal instinct overriding rational thought. She told herself she was imagining things. Grief did strange things to perception. The warmth was residual body heat. The staff's unease was collective sorrow. The speed of the paperwork was simply efficiency. If you've ever trusted a system because everyone else did, staying a little longer might change how you see that choice. Althea's hand hovered above Rowan's covered face. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She told herself she was imagining things, but her body refused to leave the room. Midnight pressed against the windows of Laurel Ridge like a held breath. Althea returned to the viewing room with cleaning supplies she didn't need, her footsteps muffled by thick carpet. The estate had gone silent. Harlan had retreated to his study with a bottle of scotch. The staff had scattered to their quarters, grateful for permission to grieve privately. She was alone with Rowan. The cloth had shifted slightly, exposing the pale curve of his small hand. Althea set down her supplies and moved closer, instinct guiding her more than duty. She reached to adjust the fabric, her fingers brushing his. She froze. His hand wasn't stiff. There was subtle resistance when she tried to reposition his fingers, not the rigid lock of rigor mortis, but something softer, pliable. Wrong for a body, hours past death. Her breath caught. She pulled her hand back, staring at his face. The silk covering had slipped near his mouth. Cold air from the estate's circulation system whispered across the room, and in that moment, she saw it, his lips parted. Just slightly, just enough to make her heart hammer against her ribs. The danger is no longer about death, it's about what happens if she speaks. Althea's mind raced through explanations. Muscle relaxation, post-mortem movement, natural decomposition processes she didn't understand, but her hands knew better. Her hands, which had cared for the living, recognized the difference between flesh surrendering to death and flesh still holding on. She didn't test further, didn't press her ear to his chest or check for pulse points. Fear paralyzed her. Not fear of the dead, but fear of being wrong. Fear of what it would mean if she was right. Fear of standing before Harlan Quinceval, before Dr. Pembroke, before the entire machinery of Laurel Ridge Estate, and saying, "I think he's still alive." They would call her hysterical, traumatized, unfit for service. What she noticed that night would not matter yet, but it would later. Althea knelt beside the casket, her knees pressing into plush carpet. Words formed on her lips, half prayer, half confession. "Father, if I'm seeing things that aren't there, forgive me." Her voice cracked. "And if I'm not seeing what is there, forgive me more. Forgive me more." She stayed there for 17 minutes, watching for another sign that never came. His chest remained still. His face held the waxen quality of the departed. Everything her training told her said, "Dead child, tragic loss, move on." Everything her body screamed said, "Wrong, wrong, wrong." Some people leave before the truth asks them to carry it. Not everyone stays long enough to know what that weight feels like. Althea rose slowly, gathering her unused cleaning supplies. She cast one final glance at Rowan's partially exposed hand. She chose silence, believing it was safer than certainty. The funeral preparation hall smelled of lilies and furniture polish. Morning light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across the marble floor, where Rowan's casket now rested on a ceremonial platform. 2 women arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, their heels clicking in synchronized rhythm. Dr. Lenora Pike carried a leather portfolio embossed with the State Ethics Board seal. Her silver hair was pulled into a flawless bun, her expression practiced in the art of compassionate authority. Beside her, Maribel Cross moved with the calculated efficiency of someone who billed by the quarter hour. The attorney's briefcase clicked open with surgical precision. "Good morning, Mr. Quinceval." Lenora's voice carried the warmth of protocol. "We're here to finalize the arrangements and ensure all ethical standards have been observed." Harlan nodded from his position near the window, his back to the casket. He hadn't looked at his son since signing the papers. Maribel spread documents across a side table. Death certificate filed with the county. Estate transfers executed. Cremation authorization signed. All beneficiary notifications completed. She glanced up. "Everything is in order. The funeral home will arrive at 2 o'clock to seal the casket." Althea stood near the doorway, her presence barely acknowledged. She'd been awake since her midnight vigil, the memory of Rowan's warm hand burning in her mind. Her mouth opened before courage could abandon her. "Dr. Pike?" Her voice came out smaller than intended. I wanted to mention something I noticed last night." 3 sets of eyes turned toward her. Lenora's smile never wavered. "Yes, Miss Monroe?" His body temperature seemed. Althea's throat tightened. Unusual. And there was movement in his fingers when post-mortem changes are often distressing to observe. Lenora interrupted gently, her tone a masterclass in dismissal wrapped in kindness. "Especially for those without medical training. It's completely natural for muscle tissue to shift during the early stages. Order often mistakes silence for peace. Maribel's pen paused mid-signature. Is there a formal challenge being raised regarding the death certification? The question hung in the air like a blade. Althea felt the weight of it, the legal machinery that would grind into motion, the investigations, the accusations of negligence that would fall on everyone in the room, including her. No, Althea whispered. I just thought, this is no longer a medical space, Miss Monroe. Lenora's voice remained soft, but steel reinforced every syllable. Dr. Pembroke completed his examination. The county has accepted the documentation. We are now in the ceremonial phase of grieving. She tilted her head with practiced sympathy. Your concern reflects your compassion, but continuation of medical speculation at this stage serves no purpose except to prolong suffering. Once sealed, Rowan's body will never be examined again. The words echoed in Althea's skull as Maribel returned to her paperwork. 2 o'clock. The funeral home. The permanent seal. After that, whatever truth existed in Rowan's body would be locked away from light, from air, from the possibility of discovery. Not everyone can carry the cost of knowing something no one else wants to see. Some truths expire on a schedule. Althea's hands clenched at her sides. Hours. She had hours. She realized there was now a deadline, and it wasn't legal. It was final. The chapel filled with the careful choreography of public mourning. Business associates arrived in dark suits, their condolences measured and brief. Extended family members clustered near the entrance, speaking in hushed tones that carried more gossip than grief. Floral arrangements lined every wall, expensive sympathy purchased by those who'd never met Rowan while he lived. Althea stood in the servants' alcove, partially hidden behind a marble column. She watched Harlan Quinceval move through the room like a man underwater, accepting handshakes with mechanical grace. He approached the casket once, pausing 3 feet away. His hand rose as if to touch the polished wood, then fell back to his side. He turned away without looking inside. He never touched his son. From her vantage point, Althea could see what the guests could not. Rowan's chest, the white silk covering it, hadn't settled the way fabric should on motionless flesh. There was a subtle elevation, a resistance to gravity that made her pulse quicken. She'd seen enough death in her years of service to recognize when a body had fully surrendered. This wasn't that. The funeral director began his quiet preparations, adjusting flowers and checking the mechanism that would lower the casket lid. 30 minutes until the service began. 30 minutes until Rowan disappeared forever behind sealed wood and locked earth. His disturbing grief, more dangerous than burying doubt? Althea moved before thought could stop her, crossing the chapel toward Dr. Lenora Pike, who stood reviewing the service program with Maribel Cross. Dr. Pike. Althea kept her voice low, urgent. Please. One more examination. Just to be certain. Lenora's expression hardened beneath its professional veneer. She placed a hand on Althea's elbow and guided her firmly toward the side exit. Miss Monroe, your employment here depends on appropriate conduct. The gentleness was gone now, replaced by cold authority. You are disrupting a family's closure. If you cannot fulfill your duties with discretion, I will recommend your immediate removal from this estate. But what if? There is no what if. Lenora's fingers tightened. There is only what is documented, what is certified, and what serves the family's peace. You are choosing disruption over compassion. Althea pulled her arm free, stumbling back toward the alcove, her chest constricted with the weight of impossible choice. She could scream, could run to the casket and demand they look again, could shatter the careful performance of grief with accusations of negligence or worse, and she would be removed, discredited, written off as hysterical. She believed she had already waited too long. The funeral director approached the casket with the lid mechanism in hand. Guests began taking their seats. The moment was collapsing into ceremony, and ceremony would seal Rowan away from the possibility of truth. Most people leave stories at the moment things feel settled. Staying now means choosing discomfort. Althea's feet carried her forward, moving against every instinct for self-preservation. The funeral director positioned the lid. Harlan turned toward the front pew. Lenora's eyes tracked Althea with warning sharpness. The casket lid began to lower, but Althea didn't step back. The casket lid descended with ceremonial slowness, its polished surface catching chapel light. Althea's hand shot forward before her mind could calculate the cost. Her fingers caught the edge of the lid, stopping its descent with a hollow thud that echoed through sudden silence. Every head turned. "What are you?" The funeral director's voice cracked with disbelief. Althea shoved the lid upward with strength she didn't know she possessed. The mechanism resisted, then gave way. The lid swung open, revealing Rowan's small form beneath white silk. "Stop her." Lenora Pike's arm extended like a sword, finger pointed in accusation. "Security! Remove this woman immediately!" Maribel Cross was already moving, her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, we have a situation in the chapel. Disturbed individual." Harlan Quinceval stood frozen in the center aisle, his face drained of color. His mouth opened, but produced no sound, as if his vocal cords had severed from his brain. Guests rose from their seats, some gasping, others backing toward exits. The careful architecture of grief collapsed into chaos. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway, moving toward Althea with trained urgency. She didn't run, didn't explain, didn't waste breath on words that would be dismissed as madness. Instead, she leaned into the casket and pressed her cheek against Rowan's partially open mouth. Warmth, not the chill of death, not the manufactured temperature of preservation. Living warmth, faint but undeniable, touching her skin like a whispered confession. Faith sometimes arrives dressed as disgrace. The security guards reached her, hands gripping her shoulders to pull her back. Althea twisted toward Harlan, her voice cutting through the chaos with desperate clarity. "Sir, please look again." The words landed like stones in water, creating ripples that froze everyone mid-motion. Harlan's eyes locked with hers, and something in her expression, some raw certainty beyond reason, made him move. He crossed the distance to the casket in 4 strides. The chapel held its collective breath as Harlan Quinceval looked at his son for the first time since signing the death certificate. His hand trembled as it reached toward Rowan's face, hovering above the small chest that hadn't quite settled. Public order collapses, but truth is still unconfirmed. Then it happened. Rowan's chest shifted. Not the subtle movement Althea had witnessed alone. Not the ambiguous signs that could be dismissed as post-mortem changes. A gasp. Small. Desperate. The sound of lungs fighting for air after being submerged too long. Rowan gasped, but no one knows why. Lenora Pike's phone clattered to the marble floor. Maribel Cross's legal documents scattered like frightened birds. The funeral director stumbled backward, his face white as altar cloth. Harlan dropped to his knees beside the casket, his hands finally touching his son. Some truths don't arrive gently. They tear through what you thought you understood and leave you choosing what to do with the wreckage. The room remained suspended between impossibility and witness. Medical explanations fractured against what they'd just seen. Legal certainties dissolved into questions no paperwork could answer. The room waited, not knowing if this was a miracle or a mistake. The ambulance screamed through Laurel Ridge's iron gates, its siren tearing through the manufactured peace of the estate. Inside, 2 paramedics worked over Rowan's small form with controlled urgency. Oxygen mask, IV line, monitors that beeped with irregular rhythm but beeped nonetheless. Pulse is thready but present, the lead paramedic called out, his voice tight with professional confusion. BP 60/40. Respiratory effort minimal but spontaneous. Harlan sat pressed against the ambulance wall, his hands gripping the bench seat hard enough to turn his knuckles white. He watched the monitors with the intensity of a man trying to rewrite reality through force of will. Each beep felt like a small resurrection, proof that the universe could still bend toward mercy. At Mercy General Hospital, the intake team moved with practiced efficiency. Rowan was transferred to a gurney and rushed through double doors marked emergency authorized personnel only. Dr. Sarah Vance, the attending physician, met them in the trauma bay with sharp eyes and sharper questions. "How long was he without intervention?" she demanded, examining Rowan's pupils with a penlight. 18 hours, Harlan managed. "He was pronounced dead yesterday evening." Vance's expression flickered not with disbelief, but with the careful neutrality of someone documenting the impossible. We'll run a full workup, neurological assessment, cardiac function, metabolic panel, but I need you to understand. She paused, choosing words with surgical precision. Spontaneous respiration doesn't confirm neurological viability. Everyone believes the worst is over. In the hallway outside the trauma bay, Lenora Pike stood with her phone pressed to her ear, her voice low and urgent. Yes, I'm aware of the optics. No, the family has not authorized a statement. What I need is clarity on liability exposure. If, she noticed Harlan approaching and ended the call abruptly. Mr. Quinceval, we should discuss. My son is alive. Harlan's voice carried the fragile edge of a man clinging to hope with bleeding fingers. Your son is responsive, Lenora corrected carefully. That is not the same as viable recovery. Dr. Pembroke's assessment may still prove medically sound despite this. Complication. Maribel Cross emerged from a consultation room, her expression grim. Harlan, we need to talk about the death certificate. The county has already processed it. If Rowan's status changes, there will be questions. Investigations. Potential criminal negligence charges against the certifying physician, possibly against you for signing premature cremation authorization. I don't care about... You should, Maribel's tone sharpened. Because if this becomes a case study in medical malpractice, every decision you made in the last 24 hours will be examined under legal scrutiny, including why you expedited the funeral arrangements. What they celebrated too early would fracture them later. 3 floors below, in a hospital security office, Althea Monroe sat in a plastic chair with a guard stationed at the door. No charges had been filed yet, but her removal from the chapel had been documented, her behavior classified as disturbed and disruptive. Her uniform had been confiscated, her employee badge suspended. She didn't know if Rowan was alive or dying, didn't know if she'd saved him or simply prolonged his suffering. The warmth she'd felt against her cheek now seemed like a fragile thread she'd pulled, unraveling something that couldn't be put back together. A nurse entered with paperwork. Miss Monroe, you'll need to sign a statement regarding your actions at the Quinceval estate. Althea's hand trembled as she reached for the pen. Some people leave before the truth asks them to carry it. Not everyone stays long enough to know what that weight feels like. In the trauma bay, Dr. Vance stepped away from Rowan's bedside, pulling off her latex gloves with a sound like a small verdict. She approached Harlan with a folder in hand, her expression carefully neutral. We have preliminary results, she said quietly, and there's something you need to see. A new report contradicts the initial prognosis. The ethics review room existed in the administrative wing of Mercy General, deliberately designed to feel neither medical nor legal, just neutral. Gray walls, conference table, windows that looked onto nothing. Dr. Vance sat at the head of the table, flanked by Dr. Pembroke and the hospital's chief ethics officer, Marcus Holden. Harlan occupied the opposite end, with Lenora and Maribel positioned like sentinels on either side. Dr. Vance opened the folder, her movements precise. Mr. Quinceval, we've completed our assessment. Rowan's current status shows minimal but consistent brain activity. Respiratory function is partially autonomous. Cardiac rhythm has stabilized. Harlan leaned forward. Then he's recovering. He's not dead, Vance corrected carefully. Recovery implies trajectory. What we have is presence. Dr. Pembroke shifted in his seat, his earlier confidence replaced by something more brittle. The initial examination followed standard protocol for catastrophic neurological events. Pupils were fixed and dilated. No response to painful stimuli. Cardiac activity had ceased had it. Marcus Holden's voice cut through with uncomfortable precision. Or did monitoring equipment fail to detect minimal function? Pembroke's jaw tightened. The equipment was calibrated within regulation standards, but not verified redundantly. Holden continued, consulting his own notes. The legal withdrawal of life support was authorized based on a single physician's assessment, conducted under time constraints imposed by the family's request for expedited arrangements. The system is not corrupt, just incomplete. Lenora's fingers drummed once against the table before stilling. You're saying protocol was followed. I'm saying protocol was sufficient for the parameters we measured, Holden replied. But sufficiency is not the same as thoroughness. In cases involving minors, especially with congenital complications, extended observation periods are recommended, but not required. The family's request for rapid processing created a compliant but compressed timeline. Harlan's voice came out hollow. I signed papers. I thought I was ending his suffering. You signed authorization for withdrawal of mechanical intervention, Maribel clarified. Her legal instincts engaged despite the moral quicksand. Not termination of biological function. The distinction matters legally but emotionally. I understand the confusion. Truth doesn't always accuse. Sometimes it only reveals. Dr. Vance closed the folder. What we're confronting is not malpractice in the criminal sense. Dr. Pembroke made reasonable determinations based on available data and family pressure for resolution. But reasonable left gaps that a more cautious approach might have caught. So no one failed, Harlan said slowly. But my son was nearly buried alive. The room absorbed that statement without rebuttal. No one offered apologies because no one could identify a clear perpetrator. The system had functioned exactly as designed, and that design had almost killed a child. Pembroke spoke finally, his voice stripped of defensiveness. I documented what I observed, but I didn't wait. I didn't sit with uncertainty long enough to let it resolve. Lenora's professional composure cracked at the edges. We prioritized closure over verification. All of us. Because the family wanted it, and the protocols permitted it. Some systems fail quietly, not through malice, but through the small surrenders we make to convenience. Marcus Holden stood, signaling the meeting's end. Rowan Quinceval will remain under intensive observation. We'll conduct neurological assessments every 6 hours, but I need everyone in this room to understand his current stability does not guarantee cognitive function, motor control, or quality of life. We bought him time. We don't yet know what that time contains. Harlan remained seated as others filed out. His hands lay flat on the table, palms down, as if anchoring himself to something solid. No one was punished. No licenses were revoked. No lawsuits would be filed. But everyone left carrying the weight of what almost happened. Rowan stabilizes, but recovery is uncertain. Spring arrived at Laurel Ridge Estate without ceremony. The gardens bloomed on schedule, indifferent to the quiet transformation happening inside the mansion's walls. A medical bed now occupied what had been Harlan's study, surrounded by monitors that beeped soft reassurance through the nights. Rowan lay there, breathing on his own but unchanged in most ways that mattered. His eyes tracked movement sometimes. His fingers curled around objects placed in his palm. But the boy who might have run through these halls, who might have laughed or argued or grown into himself, that boy remained suspended in potential, neither fully present nor entirely gone. Dr. Sarah Vance visited twice weekly, documenting incremental changes with cautious optimism. Brain plasticity in children is remarkable, she told Harlan during one visit. But we're measuring progress in millimeters, not milestones. Harlan nodded without looking away from his son. He'd stopped asking about timelines or prognoses. He simply sat beside the bed each evening after the nurses completed their rotations, his hand resting near Rowan's, not quite touching but close enough to feel the warmth that had almost been buried. Althea Monroe still worked at Laurel Ridge. Her employment had been quietly retained after Marcus Holden's report concluded she'd acted on legitimate medical concern rather than hysteria. No formal apology was offered. No commendation appeared in her file. She simply continued cleaning rooms, preparing meals, moving through the estate like a ghost haunting her own vindication. But peace had not returned with her job. She woke most nights at 3 a.m., her mind replaying the moment her hand stopped the casket lid. Sometimes in these dark hours, she wondered what would have happened if she'd been wrong. If Rowan had been truly dead and she'd simply desecrated grief with her arrogance. The line between heroism and madness felt thinner than anyone wanted to admit. Not every miracle restores what was lost, some only prevent a deeper loss. Dr. Lenora Pike had resigned from the State Ethics Board 6 weeks after the incident. No scandal forced her departure. No investigation targeted her conduct. She'd simply submitted a brief letter citing personal reasons and disappeared from professional circles. Maribel Cross heard she'd taken a position at a small rural clinic, working with patients who had no legal teams, no expedited timelines, no pressure to choose efficiency over thoroughness. The lawsuit everyone expected never materialized. Harlan refused to pursue legal action against Dr. Pembroke or the hospital. What would I sue for? 1. He'd asked Maribel. Time? Certainty? You can't litigate your way back to the moment before you stopped paying attention. Pembroke continued practicing medicine, but those who worked with him noticed changes. He ordered redundant tests, extended observation windows, sat with uncertainty longer than protocols required. He never spoke about Rowan Quinceval publicly, but the case had rewritten something fundamental in how he approached the dying. On a Tuesday evening, 8 weeks after the funeral that never happened, Althea brought dinner to Harlan's study-turned-care room. He sat in his usual chair, reading aloud from a book Rowan would probably never comprehend but might somehow hear. "Mr. Quinceval," Althea said quietly, setting the tray on a side table. "Will you need anything else tonight?" Harlan looked up, and for the first time since that day in the chapel, he met her eyes directly. "Thank you, Miss Monroe." 2 words. Not forgiveness that would imply she'd done something wrong. Not gratitude that would simplify what couldn't be simplified. Just acknowledgement that she'd seen what others hadn't, and carried the cost of that seeing. Althea nodded and turned to leave. "Miss Monroe," Harlan's voice stopped her at the doorway. How do you live with it? Knowing you were right?" She considered the question, her hand resting on the doorframe. "I don't know yet, sir. Some mornings I wake up proud. Some mornings I wake up terrified of what I almost didn't do." She paused. "But I wake up, and he's still breathing. That's something. Some stories don't ask for applause. They ask who we listen to when it matters." Nothing returned to what it was. The estate carried the weight of its near catastrophe in silence, in the extra beat of hesitation before anyone signed medical documents, in the way staff members lingered longer at bedsides, unwilling to accept easy answers. Rowan remained suspended between categories, not recovered, not lost, simply present in a way that defied the clean narratives people preferred. His survival was neither triumph nor tragedy, but the complicated truth that exists in the space between. And in that space, Harlan Quinceval sat each night, reading to a son who might never answer, holding vigil for a life he'd almost signed away. Not every miracle restores what was lost, some only prevent a deeper loss.